anybody who is happy with your results will open their wallet and spend more money.
Welcome to Leadership In, the podcast where we talk with leaders who've built, grown, and reinvented in one of the fastest moving industries there is. I'm Geoff Wallenitz.
And I'm Greg McDonald. Our guest today has spent his career building teams and companies that don't just grow, they scale and evolve while building what's next. Dave Jacobs is president and CEO of Receptiv, a company helping publishers, platforms, and brands understand audience attention in real time and turn it into better outcomes and higher revenue. If you've worked in digital media, you've likely crossed paths with something Dave helped build, from his early days at advertising.com and AOL, to leading at 33Across and June Group, to startups that push the industry forward. Dave and I first worked together back in 2011 on the AOL Yahoo Microsoft alliance, and I've always admired how he pairs sharp strategy with a grounded human approach to leadership. Dave, welcome to Leadership In. It's great to have you here.
Hey guys, great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So we ask the same question out of the box every time. First question, tell us what you do. Like, how do you introduce yourself at a dinner party?
Sure. So I'm CEO of Receptiv. What we do is we're focused on shaping the future of accountable advertising. We're using machine learning to identify the optimal moments to serve ads to consumers based on a number of signals that we interpret and leverage from a machine learning standpoint.
Okay, so let's scratch at that a little bit. Define accountable for us, right?
Sure. So if you think about anything from upper, middle, and lower funnel, it's really based on whatever the advertiser's KPI is. And what we will do is we'll partner with that advertiser, ensure that we're able to track and measure whatever that KPI is. And we will use our machine learning to basically send signal in real time to help them make the optimal decision through whatever ad serving platform, DSP platform they're using. They've already determined what sites they want to run on, what audiences they want to target. We're targeting the moments when they want to actually deliver ads against those audiences and those sites. And in some respects, it's a little bit of addition by subtraction, because we're saying, hey, out of 100 ad opportunities, there might be 30 where somebody's not likely to be paying attention. They stepped away from their laptop, they're walking down the street and the phone's in their pocket. There's a number of instances where you don't really want to serve that ad, even if it's the right user, even if it's the right website.
Interesting. And you're omni-channel.
Yeah, so right now we're focused on the open web. So everything that we do is mobile web and desktop. We've got plans to expand that into the app environment, the CTV environment in the future. But right now, that's a big area to tackle, and that's where we're laser focused.
Got it. So we're on a podcast right now. It feels like audio is ripe for disruption in that space because it's easy to 15-second a few times past whatever break that is. Are you guys thinking about expanding into audio?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with your sentiment that I skip past ads all the time on audio. It really comes down to how you get the right signals. And right now, we haven't investigated the time to really determine, is there a there for us to be able to add value in the signal stream.
That makes a ton of sense.
All right, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about Receptiv in a bit, but first, just a little bit more about you to help set the stage. So you've worked alongside a lot of the industry's early builders. Is there anybody who influenced your approach to leadership the most, and what sort of things stayed with you from that experience?
Yeah, so you mentioned advertising.com. I'd have to go with the CEO, founder of advertising.com, was Scott Ferber. He worked really hard, but he also trusted his people a lot. And he wouldn't be afraid to give you responsibility and say, hey, you've got this, I trust you, just go make it happen. And it was a little intimidating and scary at first, but at the same time, it gave me the opportunity to grow a lot. And I went from being an analyst to running a business development, account management team, a whole bunch of different things that I never would have expected to be involved with.
Amazing. I talk to young professionals and even students pretty frequently, and one piece of advice I tend to give is that you need to kind of jump into the deep end and trust yourself and trust that the people who are giving you the responsibility that you've been given is something you can do, right? And that it's okay to fail and make mistakes because that's ultimately how you're going to grow. I don't know Scott, but I have worked with leaders like that in the past who are really smart about how they invest in their people and have hired people to do a job and expect them to do the job and rely on them to do the job instead of micromanaging the hell out of them.
Yeah, it's also a function, I think, of the time in the industry where we were. If you think back to the early days of the industry, you couldn't say, here's the 10-year guy who's got 10 years experience doing programmatic ads. There were no programmatic ads. You couldn't go to the person who had 15 years experience, whatever. I'd come from a big six accounting background, consulting background. This couldn't have been any further from what I was used to. But at the same time, I grew more in a couple years there than I could have ever imagined.
So that's actually a perfect segue, which is given that, again, at that time of the evolution of the space, there were very few people you could rely on to give you advice about what to do. Can you think of some piece of advice that you were given that you found was either wildly wrong or surprisingly right or anything like that perhaps you got from either Scott or someone else?
This is going to be like a zoom out macro thing, which was I started my career in accounting, and quite frankly, I did it because I was told by my parents, go get a major you can get a job in.
Yeah, it's not bad advice.
I didn't love accounting, but I was told by a couple of people, they're like, look, you may hate accounting, but you're going to get so much out of the first couple of years in this career because you're going to understand 360, how businesses operate, how you can drive success, profitability, et cetera, et cetera. And that was completely true. I'll say this to my son, who's a college sophomore. I'll say, like, don't follow your passion. Follow something you're gonna be like really good in, and then link it to your passion at some point that you can figure out how to bring those two things together, because you want to ultimately grind out a couple years and figure out how you can set yourself up for success.
Setting yourself up for success is also finding things that you maybe didn't know existed too. So like you got to get your start somewhere. A lot of the jobs that I've had didn't exist when I went to school, and if they had existed, I wouldn't have known about them. If you pick from something you know, you're also limiting yourself to whatever it is you know.
The last job I had didn't exist 15 years before I had it.
Right.
Forget about when I was in school. Right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Look, when I started my first job out of college, I had never even logged on to email.
Right.
So, you know, it's hard to believe, but that's how far we've come in 20, almost 30 years.
Yeah.
And it's only going to accelerate. I mean, all the people that have careers as influencers now, that's a pretty recent thing on a shorter horizon. And I think about my nieces and nephews. The oldest one is 13. She's going to have a career that doesn't exist today at some point.
Yeah.
Definitely not checking email either.
Right.
Come full circle.
Exactly. No more email.
So you've moved between startups and large organizations, and then boardrooms, obviously, as well over the course of your career. How has your approach to showing up and leading evolved over time and through those different environments?
There's no question that when you are part of bigger companies, you can actually learn a lot from structured leadership in a way that you don't necessarily get from small companies. You can have small companies that have great leaders. You have small companies that have toxic leaders. Founders can drive the culture in a way that doesn't happen at big companies at all. If you think about advertising.com, gets bought by AOL, is part of Time Warner. I'm sitting in meetings 10 blocks up the street for like M&A conversation with Jeff Bewkes, the chairman, CEO of Time Warner, Ted Leonsis, who's now the chairman of all the Washington sports teams. And you just watch these guys and you watch what they're doing and you sort of see how they act, right? They listen, they smile, they speak in a measured way. You can sort of take those signals and just sort of figure out how to apply that to who I am, as opposed to just 100% observing and copycatting. But there are themes that exist why people are successful, why people are attracted to certain leaders. And if you can pick one or two things off along the way, that's just going to make you a better leader over time.
I'll credit my wife here, actually, who constantly says to me, talk more slowly and lower your register, because I talk a mile a minute. So let's actually circle back to Receptiv. When you think about Receptiv and the ways that you guys lead in the space, it's very niche what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
I said this phrase in an email that I sent for a company that I'm consulting with now, which is like, that company's not looking to reinvent the wheel. They're looking to reimagine how it rolls, which it sounds a little bit like what you guys are doing. So talk a little bit about how you lead from a product perspective, perhaps market perspective, maybe even a people perspective.
Sure. At Receptiv, we've used this phrase that we're shaping the future of accountable advertising. And we mean that in that if you think about the industry and the way the industry has evolved, there's this tendency to sort of say, well, ad tech's gotten really boring. Quite frankly, I felt the same way. I'd spent a year and a half outside of ad tech before I came in here. So like there's Google and Facebook, there's a bunch of DSPs and blah, 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 and like there's nothing cool to do anymore. And what I came across when I found Receptiv was a really interesting intersection of really good tech, people who hadn't figured out how to commercialize the tech. They didn't really know what to do with it, even so far as they were trying to determine, like, should we sell this to an insurance company to determine if somebody's looking at their phone while they're driving? Like, they were taking these far afield approaches to how to use a tech solution, and really just wanted to say, all right, let's just narrow in on what we know we can do. Let's focus on two things. One, hyper-focus on the open web. Let's not try to create a bunch of things that we're like an inch deep in. And then two, we have to go to where the buyers and sellers are used to transacting, meaning we can't just have this niche solution that sits over here, and then you have to ask companies to ask engineering teams and ask product teams to do a bunch of custom work. We need to figure out how to do the custom work so that we exist in the places that the other companies that we want to partner with can easily say yes to us. And ultimately, I can tell you how many times I've been part of business development conversations, product conversations where it all makes sense, but now it's on a roadmap somewhere. It's getting put in a prioritization queue, and that's where like ideas go to die sometimes. Our whole philosophy is around, does it work? Does it scale? Can we be super easy to work with? And can we drive repeatable business? If it doesn't fit in one of those 4 categories, we either need to add a category or we need to probably not do it. So those are, I'd say, the 4 sort of guiding principles that we focus on.
Can I ask another question about the open web, which is, did you decide to focus there because it was easier to scale the tech there, because that environment happens to be more ripe for lack of accountability, to use the framing you gave, or is it some combination of other things than that?
Well, if you think about the open web, there are a number of protocols that make it easy for companies to plug into in a way that you can't necessarily plug into a Facebook ecosystem where it's a binary yes or no, or a CTV framework, which quite frankly, we don't get a clear script or a clear signal the same way you were talking about podcasting earlier. What we do is we focus on taking a number of signals to build a receptive score, or an engagement metric, if you will. And that is something that can be applied across hundreds and hundreds of sites through a combination of observed data and predictive data.
You pass that value into the bid stream?
We do.
Yeah.
And then can you talk a little bit about how it's different? I mean, I've been doing work with Receptiv for probably close to 2 years now. And I think it's something that's really, really interesting in terms of what the product does and how it's much more of almost a deterministic signal relative to some of the proxy signals that started.
Well, I don't want to say I know 100% how everybody's tech works, because a lot of that's sort of behind the curtain. What I can say is what we do is we deploy our code on as many websites as possible to build a broad base of signals and then use that to apply that probabilistically. So we have a large deterministic pool. We apply that probabilistically. We pass that signal along in the bid stream. We don't rely on panel data, for example, that says, hey, here's 10,000 people. We kind of try to figure out where they're looking on a screen. And based on how they're looking on a screen, then it's a permanent state. So there might be a company A that says, hey, based on what we know about this website, this is a receptive place on a particular site. We don't think about it that way, because the way we think about the industry from a consumer standpoint is Greg can be in a certain Adidas category, you can be in the Nike category, I can be in the whatever sneaker I'm wearing category. And those are semi-permanent states of targeting, but we can all be receptive at different points in time. And by definition, that is a temporary state. And what we want to do is find that person when they're in that state and then target the Adidas signal, the Nike signal, the Travis Matthews signal, whatever.
Oh, that's
it is.
hyper interesting.
So it's not an or, it's an and.
Right.
Think about it as, hey, target Nike, but only target it here.
Right.
And then you can say, well, we want to eliminate the 10% least receptive opportunities or the 60% least receptive opportunities. So you can use think of it as almost like a dial that you can use to determine, hey, I need to achieve KPIs, so what's the level of the dial that I want to turn on or off?
So the score is, let's say, 0 to 100 based on how receptive someone is to receiving the message.
Correct. And there's 2 ways that we implement that. One is we have 10-point cohorts that we can pass. The other one is we have a yes-no cohort that we leave at about a 60-40 split.
Gotcha.
For some people, they just want like that base, hey, the user's probably got a phone in their pocket, or it's probably a bot, or whatever the case may be.
Receptive in the sense that they're looking at it.
They're engaged.
Got it.
It's something that's so interesting because you're targeting more or less at the user level, but in a non-PII way.
Yeah, it's PII safe. It's 100% at that user level, but we always say that we don't compete with other targeting solutions. We augment them. Mm-hmm. So if you think about a stool, you've got a leg 1 audience, leg 2 sites, leg 3 receptive.
Right. And are there any case studies or anything you can share to bring it to life?
Yeah, so we had a large B2C client. It was actually posted during a week up on their website. So one of our platform partners we've integrated with. And what we've done is we've said, for this particular brand, use your DSP, so they use the trade desk, and pass us your information so we can at least understand and identify what's happening. We're not informing the optimization, we're just observing it. And then we're doing deal A, which is receptive, and deal B, which is non-receptive. And then we looked at both mid-funnel and lower funnel KPIs, which was kind of go to the page and form fill. Those collectively drove about a 30% improvement across the board on both of those metrics. And the other thing, which is, I say you can believe us, but also the DSP ultimately knows too. The DSP started with a 50-50 split of spend, and they started spending by about a 2-to-1 ratio on the Receptiv supply because they were seeing the signals and the conversions as well.
So the sell side must love that. It's like increasing your win rate.
If we can do it at scale, for those sell side partners that are participating, they certainly benefit from that, yes.
Nice. Now, the company's what, 7, 8 years old?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So it was started out of an incubator in Montreal. It's a tech team based in Montreal, and as I alluded to earlier, they're focused on science and signal.
Yep.
Completely unrelated to ad tech. Nobody in the team had an ad tech background, and they went through a couple of iterations of product models and go to market. They settled a little bit on an ad tech-y model that wasn't really a scalable model. And I joined a year ago, and we've been laser focused on creating something that sort of achieves that efficacy and scale that I was mentioning earlier.
And so how has that been for the team? Because that's pretty well established, not quite getting traction. They know the tech is good. How's that been over the course of your year?
It's been, I'd say, two things. One, because they've had some false starts in terms of commercial success, there's a little bit of this, almost like they didn't believe it would work. Meaning they're almost like, I'm like, no, I'm telling you. Like, we have this motto where you have a Trojan horse, you put something in the wild, you get it on publisher sites, you monetize it in the open web, and they're like, are you sure? Like, I'm not sure this is really gonna work. And they started to see the work, that's cool. But what it's forced is, from a DNA perspective, and you guys both know this, like so much of running in ad tech is supposedly machine to machine magic, but it's really a bunch of people complementing the magic.
Yes,
to look at every knob and see which knob stopped turning today and which pipe stopped connecting.
And it's been like that for 30 years.
And
that's the dirty secret.
Well, exactly. And what the team was just, I think, trained to think was that, oh, well, cool. Now we've got this thing and it's like a money printing machine or whatever. And like nothing can be further from the truth, right? Because it's like, wait a second. Oh, the deal went live, but it's only spending 6 cents a day. Why is that? You know?
Right.
So it's a little bit of education, but I'd say the morale, when you can come in and attempt something, try it, and then see it work, it doesn't necessarily go in a straight line, but it's really refreshing. I think the team's motivated and excited to see that. If anything, they're trying to figure out, well, wow, there's a lot going on here. So how do we hire and scale and figure out how to do this at scale? Because it's a team that hasn't had a big commercial presence. They've really been solely focused on product and tech, which I like.
How many employees?
11.
Yeah, okay. So that is a really nice segue. So you've been at AOL, which was, tens of thousands of people, and you're at Receptiv now, which is 11 people. And you've been at companies of sizes all in between. When you think about what it means to lead in a company that's emerging in a space versus a company that's established in a space, does your leadership philosophy change in some way? Is it how do you approach?
Well, there's no getting around being like super hands-on if you're at a small company, because there's nobody to like book meetings or like assistant. Like, what's that? Like nobody's going to do that kind of stuff for you. I think it's one of those philosophies that I've always had, which is as long as you show up and are willing to do whatever the work that needs to be done, that's just setting an example for the people around you. And that's not something that I'd say is different about how I act now. It's just more that there's no layers in between. It's a very small team. So everybody can kind of see, who's on Slack today, who's doing this, who's doing that. The thing that I like about it is you have the opportunity to interact with basically everybody. I mean, I'm not managing everybody, but you have the opportunity to interact with everybody. And that's the really neat thing to be able to be a part of.
In that context, like how do you build the discipline around the execution and the processes that help the business scale without killing the agility?
If you look at the agility piece, that is something that you can kind of, I'd say that's like a moving target a little bit, which is like at a small company, the business priorities aren't set quarters out. They're just something that they're set a day out sometimes or 3 days out.
What's burning right now?
Yeah.
Oh, Magnite needs this or whatever. It's like, ooh, go this way. It's a high level of communication around my CTO, who's also the founder, still with the business. He's an awesome business partner because he is able to connect the R&D and AI, the tech execution, and also you can put him in front of a client. So it's a really good sort of sweet spot to have someone like that as a business partner to build credibility, build confidence in our product when you're talking, whether it's to an agency. Every agency has like that real like dog with the bone analyst that's really trying to figure out if you're full of you know what or not. Someone that can diffuse that's very valuable. So I don't know that leadership styles necessarily have to change, other than you have to just show up and do the work and set that example. Because if you do that, I don't have an expectation everybody's going to work the exact same way or as hard as me or whatever. But if you don't do that, then there's no reason for anybody else to do that. So it's almost like you have to set that example or the company's not going to exist.
Is there a decision that you've made recently that might surprise people outside the company that you've made it?
I don't think I can think of anything specifically other than to say like my DNA is not in the agency world so much. So not at all, to be candid. So if I think about the direction that the business is going, we're focusing very much on direct to brand and agency to drive results and not relying on platforms and publishers to drive our success. They're incredibly important partners for us, but we recognize, and at least I recognize, that we're going to need to figure that piece out. That's a fun opportunity for me because it's not where I've spent a lot of my career.
That's really insightful. And I think a lot of people are realizing that going back to the brand, not just from a corporate success perspective, but from a how are we working together perspective to make sure we're hitting the KPIs you are looking for and not looking to effectively, you're not looking to disintermediate people necessarily, but you're all looking to work alongside together. If you don't have that direct contact with the brand, it's really hard to play that game of telephone to understand what the KPI is.
Yeah, it is. And quite frankly, working with the agencies is a perfect proxy in many cases. They're good partners for ours. So just having the visibility is really important for us. And we're going to continue to invest and double down in that side of the business because that's where we see the biggest pain points, especially with loss of signal in the open web. The ability to drive efficiency is something that is always going to get rewarded.
On this point of the KPIs, wanted to double click in a little bit. You're talking about outcomes, and it's something where I was looking at this more recently and realizing just how much this theme of outcomes is flashing in our faces. It was the theme of the recent Marketecture Live conference. We had TV Scientific on recently. They're selling on an outcomes basis. The receptive tech very much lends itself exactly to that point. How are you all thinking about outcomes and where it fits within your business? And is that the message that's landing with folks?
Agencies always have pressure to deliver for their clients. So anytime you can make something easy for them to implement and drive results, that's going to be met with, I think, a good result. So the term outcomes, I think, is getting maybe more of a buzzy tone than maybe it needs to, because I don't see outcomes as a new KPI or a new thing. For whatever reason, that seems to be referred to a bit more. But when we think about the kind of accountable media world, that's really what outcomes-based solutions, I think about the old days of CPA advertising and conversion tracking. It goes all the way back to that. Anybody who is happy with your results will open their wallet and spend more money. So that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. I think it's become a little bit more buzzy too at a moment of economic uncertainty, and people are trying to have it be more accountable. And I think, and over time, there's a pretty healthy tendency in a lot of the ad industry to try to make the right ad to the right user at the right time more and more true and take advantage of new technology and then make it more measurable wherever that's possible.
I love that as kind of a segue to the next thing we typically talk about, which is, so if you have, let's say, this overhanging notion of, let's say, uncertainty in the economy, right? I wouldn't necessarily argue that the economy is going to tank, but I don't know that it's going to take off either. I don't think anybody really knows exactly. So when you start to think through that, and then you think about the business that you guys are beginning, and effectively the part of the business that you guys are beginning to shape, right, which is receptiveness to advertising, accountability around advertising. So if you think about that, the economy, and then the notion that you guys are trying to manage fast growth, right, as a small company. How do you innovate around all of those things, right? Given that you're running 1,000 miles an hour towards something that's a little nebulous, which you're defining, without real certainty around where the economy itself is going.
This may be a contrarian view, but my view is if we deliver on what we say we're going to deliver on, the economy matters a lot less than if we're trying to sell a super pretty creative in a branded multi-week solution that's got a brand recall study or something like that. And there's nothing against that type of advertising. But if somebody's literally looking for signups for airfares or going to a website to get more information about flooring products or whatever the case may be, that's something they can measure. And if the economy's bad, there might be fewer people that want that, but I can guarantee you the client wants to get more people to come to their storefronts. So those are the things that we're really focused on. And I mean, there can be these horrible black swan events that everybody's in trouble with. But in general, I'd rather be us in a period of a down market than somebody who's more focused on just brand and creative.
I love that as a response and confidence in the product itself. That's really, yeah, it sounds like you just have conviction in what the organization is doing.
Well, the data shows it. I mean, when we run campaigns, the data shows that you get 30, 40, 50% improvement. And it might sound, how would I describe this? It really comes down to, we've spent years evaluating and analyzing data points that have fed our solution. And that cycle has kind of taken us to now, it's like the 5th, 6th, 7th version of our deployments.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this would apply with Receptiv yet, but just in general in your career, have you ever had to make a call that looked risky from the outside, but felt essential for the long-term health of the business?
I'll give you an example. It wasn't necessarily my call, but it was something I was advocating for a long time, which was, if you go back to the history of digital, you had ad networks, and then you had SSPs. And at advertising.com, we had gone from being an upstart company to being the largest Comscore measured ad network, and we held that position for a long time. But you could start to see these SSPs emerging. I remember meeting with Rajiv from Pubmatic in the basement of a townhouse in Palo Alto in 2007.
Right.
And just trying to feel out what he's doing and him wanting to partner with us. And it was pretty clear to me that we, as a network, wouldn't have a place. We had a DSP, basically, an advertising.com DSP, and then we had a big supply footprint, but you couldn't just operate a closed ecosystem. So I advocated for a long time to launch your own SSP. And that was a long battle to fight, because the margins were going to move from whatever 35, 40% to something transparent lower, to having, in some cases, exclusive access to supply, which we had for AOL inventory, to opening that up to other buyers. So I think a lot of people viewed it as risky. I viewed it as necessary. And ultimately, it was probably proven right. But it was sort of bittersweet, because we launched an SSP. It grew massively to hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue. It massively improved AOL's top line. But had we done that 2 years earlier, that probably would have been the biggest SSP in the world. Mm-hmm. And other people had already jumped ahead at that point. So we were sort of creating a parity play as a way to access certain supply, as opposed to really only focusing on that one piece. But it was the right move. It was just a move that was a little bit later than we would have liked it to have been.
What was it that got it from all the hesitation? Because that would have been a huge move at the time. And What was it that got people over the line?
It really was about the fact that every publisher conversation was starting to go to, oh, you'd have to talk to our SSP. And more, and it wasn't real-time bidding. There wasn't real-time bidding, pre-bid, indexes, header bidding, any of that. These companies are basically doing ad ops for publishers and managing the ad stack. And that's where Rubicon and Pubmatic were playing almost kingmaker a little bit of, hey, you want to be top of the stack, second of the stack, whatever. And we were no longer the number one ad network, because it's a black box. We all know exactly why. But the access was obviously a bit filtered through these other platforms. And I don't know that there was a single moment, but it was also probably an acknowledgement that no matter how good your sales team is, more demand drives higher yield. And if you have an AOL at the time, many hundreds of millions of dollars a year media property, you're going to make more money by opening that up. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Can I ask a more philosophical question tied to that? I find this fascinating, because there's this constant push and pull between, do I want to lead or do I want to be a fast follower? And it sounds like you were advocating leadership in the SSP space for advertising.com versus being a fast follower to Pubmatic. When you start to think about things like that, what's your assessment process?
I don't even think I would credit it as being a leader. I would say being a fast follower was necessary. I'd say we were a slow follower.
Oh,
maybe.
So you were even a step behind.
We were maybe, it was a few years behind,
Yeah.
as opposed to, hey, jump in and let's figure this out. I remember having conversations about, and this goes back literally to like 2007, about, hey, we could become an SSP of SSPs or a network of networks. And we would kick these ideas around. People would think we were crazy. Like, why would you do this? There was a play there. It never got too far along, because we're at a big company, had big numbers to hit, everything else, so it would just stay in the corner. That is the benefit of a small company. When you only have one thing to do, you're laser focused. Focus can be a weapon if you're a small entity, and that's the only thing you have to sell, right? You only have one thing on the truck to sell. You're going to do a good job selling that one thing.
Yeah, it goes back to the innovation point, right? Like AOL was an innovator at one point, but ultimately, when you go from, I'm going to use the analogy, like skiff to cruise ship, basically, turning that boat into a certain direction takes a lot more effort.
Well, yeah, and the incentives are just hard to solve for. If you have incentives that are driven around something unrelated to what we're talking about, then nobody's going to pay attention.
Well, for them, it's also putting hundreds, to your point, hundreds of millions of dollars of top line revenue potentially at
Yep.
risk. You can understand why someone might be a little reluctant to do that, but it takes some vision to jump, and I would call it pot odds, right? You're betting a few $100 million to make a couple billion.
Yeah, 100%.
As a leader, how do you balance performance versus humanity?
Humanity sounds so noble. I think everybody has different things that motivate them, and everybody has things going on that you don't know about.
Yeah.
I just say, be transparent. In my case, I like to tell people not just what I like to do, but who I am outside of work. So I try to start all my Monday meetings with talking about the weekend, because I think it's a window into what people like to do, whether they like to do construction on their home or their kids have a soccer match or whatever. And those are the kind of things that I think matter long term. The reason that I enjoy this industry so much has a lot more to do with the fact that the people that I've gotten to know are fun and interesting people, and less to do with the particular business transaction that have happened along the way.
Yeah. The point about the folks in the industry is such a good one. And then just the culture you're talking about, the transparency, make it personal and personable. That does seem to really resonate with people. And clearly it's a formula that's worked for you.
Well, and it's not like people don't have to work hard and there's not accountability.
Sure.
But as long as you're clear with the accountability, and if there's an issue, just talk about it.
Yeah.
I'll raise my hand and say, look, I screwed up. I said I'd give you this on
Right.
Wednesday. You're not going to get it till Friday because I
Yeah.
have to do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
I like to always start with, it's my fault, but here's where we are, as opposed to, what did you guys do?
Yeah.
And the truth's probably in the middle sometimes, but you never need to, praise in public, and you don't criticize in public. There's no value in that.
And
I think people would be surprised at how uncommon that is as a perspective, as a leader. And I'm not even just talking about advertising technology necessarily, but I think people who are listening to this that are maybe younger and early in their careers would be surprised at a lack of accountability and transparency at higher level leadership.
I mean, not every company has it. You don't always get a window into what's going on, especially at big companies. You have
Yeah.
no idea what's happening on the top exec floors at Time Warner Center. It's just a black hole.
Well, we said this in the last one of these that we did, and I would say it again here because it applies. The world is very different now than it was when we were starting out. And so if you think about taking a job at a big five, well, I guess big six then accounting firm, or like we did, jumping right into advertising, I went to work in the morning and I went home at the end of the day, and I didn't really give a crap what was going on. I knew I got a paycheck every couple of weeks,
Right.
and that was that. I didn't think about it, but I think that people coming into the industry now, this next generation of people are like, look at authenticity as far more important than I did when I was starting out my career.
Oh, absolutely. Completely agree.
Yeah. Okay. So when I'm going to ask a two-part question to
All right.
sail us off into the sunset. The first part is when you start to think about the future of advertising technology, media in general, what do you find exciting about that? And then when you start to think about your own legacy in the industry, what would you like your lasting impact to be? How would you like to be remembered?
On your first question, it's hard to predict where things are going to net out or end up. As I mentioned earlier, I was kind of fine with not doing anything else in ad tech 2 years ago, simply because I figured, well, if somebody needs something, I'm happy to help. But I enjoyed building. I realized I enjoyed building at different stages in my career. And what excites me is, you said something about podcasting that we're not focused on, but there's podcast advertising, CTV advertising, all these different buckets emerge. There'll be another thing that emerges. And if you can be early on in some of those macro themes, you can do some really cool stuff and some really interesting things. Now, it's harder to make a market than to participate in the growth. And that's what we're trying to do here at Receptiv, which is we're not trying to make a market. We're trying to inject ourselves into existing processes and workflows that can drive accountable results. In terms of my legacy, honestly, I don't think about it a lot. I think about the fact that I've got two great kids that I hope I'm setting a good example for. I think about the fact that I'm on some really cool text exchanges with former colleagues that I enjoy connecting with, and the fact that I can do spontaneous meetups during Ad Week with a lot of great, smart people. The thing I probably would say that if I look back even now, the number of people that I've had a chance to work alongside, to hire, to lead, that I now see are in leadership positions across the industry is super cool. And not only that, the number of women that are leaders in the industry that I had a chance to hire earlier in their career is also super cool. So I think about the fact that 15 years ago, balancing family, work-life balance as a working mom wasn't a common thing. I was having to confront that as a manager who the rest of the organizations didn't even really have a strong experience set with that. And it just made me a better manager.
I love that. That's a great place to stop. Dave,
Awesome.
thanks, man. This was
Appreciate
fantastic.
it.
Really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it as well.
Leadership In is hosted and produced by Jeff Wallenitz and Greg McDonald. This episode was recorded at Podstream Studios in New York City, and we'd like to give special thanks to the amazing studio team and to Jess DeWeese for production support. Please follow the show in your favorite podcast app, and if you have questions or know someone who'd make a great guest, we'd love to hear from you at leadershipinpodcast@gmail.com.